The opening scene of the film shows a group of young people working in the sweltering sun while wearing prison uniforms. In the middle of nowhere, it appears that they are digging holes. A young boy named Barbag purposefully gets bitten by a snake while working in such hostile conditions in order to escape the taxing work. The action then cuts to Stanley Yelnats, a young man walking down the street. He is suddenly knocked to the ground when a pair of sneakers land on his head. He makes the choice to keep the shoes because his crazy family is trying to come up with a fix for stinky shoes. He is, however, detained by the police on his way home on suspicion of stealing the shoes. They belong to a well-known basketball player by the name of Clyde Livingston, who gave them to a good cause. The boy is taken home by the police, who also tell his family about the incident. The Yelnat, however, are not surprised and attribute the bad luck to a family omen. Stanley is then brought before the judge, who sentences him to 18 months in a juvenile detention facility called Camp Green Lake. He meets Mr. Sir, the supervisor. There, Stanley is warned by Mr. Sir, a very strict man, that it would be useless to flee the camp because there is no water for miles. He also discusses the area's venomous reptiles, which have reportedly claimed the lives of many people. After receiving his uniform, Stanley is instructed to dig a hole daily that is 5 feet deep and 5 feet in diameter in order to build character. He's not supposed to search for anything specific, but if he does come across something interesting, he might get the day off. The next scene finds Dr. Pendansky, the camp psychologist, introducing Stanley to a group of boys known as X-Ray, Armpit, Squid, Zigzag, Magnet, and Zero. Being the youngest, Zero is always silent. Barfbag is replaced on the squad by Stanley after being taken to the hospital earlier. Zero breaks his silence for the first time at lunch when Stanley reveals that he was falsely accused of stealing Livingston's sneakers, surprising everyone. Then, in a flashback, it is revealed that Stanley I's great-grandfather had amassed wealth in the stock market before being robbed by a woman by the name of Kissing Kate Barlow. He experiences shock as a result, and within months he is totally bankrupt. Stanley I is forced to work on a farm in Europe, where he meets and falls in love with his master's daughter. He asks Madame Zeroni, the town's fortune teller, for advice on how to win the girl's affection. Zeroni, on the other hand, advises him to emigrate to the US instead because the girl is a fool. Stanley I considers it carefully, but in the end he goes to ask the girl's hand in marriage despite the advice. Unfortunately, if he wants to have a chance to marry his daughter, the girl's father instructs him to bring a big, fat pig as a dowry. Stanley I visits Zeroni once more, and this time she gives him a piglet, instructing him to carry it up the mountain and force it to drink from a naturally nourishing stream. In agreement, Stanley I promises to go see Zeroni once he succeeds. In order to help the elderly woman regain her strength and youth, he also vows to carry her up the mountain. The pig eventually gets bigger, and Stanley transports it to the girl's father. Zeroni had previously stated that the girl would turn out to be very foolish. She can no longer decide between Stanley and a different plain-looking suitor. Disappointed, Stanley makes the decision to travel to America as suggested by Zeroni in his first advice. However, he completely forgets to keep his promise to her in the process. The fortune teller is so enraged by this that she curses his entire male lineage for all of eternity. Stanley returns to the present and becomes accustomed to camp life. One day, in an effort to get a day off, he finds a fossil and shows it to the counselor, Dr. Pendansky. He is informed by the counselor that the warden has no interest in fossils. He also mentions that this area once had a lake, and the warden's grandfather owned the entire area around it. The scene then cuts to the warden's grandfather, the town's ruler. 100 years prior, onions are being sold by Sam, a man. He offers Catherine, a local teacher, a free bag of onions because he has feelings for her. In return, she offers him a jar of freshly picked peaches. Stanley defeats X-Ray and the others in the present, and they accept him into their team by dubbing him Caveman. He is skilled at finding fossils, which explains why. He chuckles as he reads his mother's stories in a letter he receives one afternoon. Soon after, Zero shows up and asks what he is laughing at while revealing that he cannot read. When Stanley is asked to teach him how to read, he declines, citing his exhaustion from digging all day. Stanley comes across a shell-like object one day that bears the initials KB. Sadly, X-Ray takes it away from him and gives it to the counselor so that she can have the day off. The camp warden, who is later revealed to be a woman, is told about the discovery by the counselor. She praises X-Ray for bringing in the item and instructs everyone to dig out his hole even deeper. Once more, the film jumps forward 100 years. Sam pays a visit to Miss Catherine and proposes to repair her leaking roof in exchange for 3 jars of her spiced peaches. Catherine concurs, and as time passes, they become more intimate. However, she begins to attract the attention of other men in the community. One night, C makes advances toward Catherine, who ruthlessly rejects him. After several weeks, Sam finally finishes her repair work, but the two still hang out. He finally gets the nerve to kiss her one day. Trout Walker, regrettably, notices this and, in a jealous rage, sets Catherine's school on fire. When the latter learns of this, she immediately seeks assistance from the local sheriff, but even he tries to kiss her. Additionally, he informs Catherine that her black lover will soon be put to death for having an illicit kiss with a white woman. She rushes to warn Sam, who was shot while in his boat, but she is too late. She is terrified. Catherine is shocked by this and decides to exact revenge on the people who killed her lover. A few days later, she assassinates the sheriff and kisses him before departing. After that, Catherine turns into an outlaw and never looks back. She then proceeds to rob affluent businessmen and landowners before killing them and bidding them farewell with her trademark kiss. As a result, she is known as Kissing Kate Barlow. After Sam is put to death, the town experiences a drought and the lake eventually dries up, making Trout Walker's property worthless. Magnet steals a bag of seed from Mr. Sir one day when he is bringing the boys water in the prison. Unfortunately, Mr. Sir discovers the missing bag and warns that everyone will face consequences. Stanley decides to take the fall to save everyone else when no one else does. In an effort to punish him for the theft, Mr. Sir brings him before the warden. Instead, the capricious warden chastises Mr. Sir for interfering with the boys' digging. As a token of gratitude for saving everyone, Zero digs his hole when Stanley returns to the field. Stanley offers to teach him how to read and write after being touched by the gesture. The more time they spend together, the more Stanley realizes that the shell casing he discovered earlier was actually a tube of lipstick. None other than Kate Barlow was the owner. Zero also reveals that his real name is Hector Zeroni at this time. The boy is obviously related to Madame Zeroni, who once cursed the Stanley family. The supervisor learns that Stanley makes Zero dig his holes one day. He calls them both useless. And when Zero overhears this, he is so furious that he smacks the man with a shovel and flees the camp. Later, Zero's escape is discussed by the warden and other camp staff members. Since Zero is an orphan, they believe he won't live more than a week. It is made known that his mother abandoned him in a park and never returned. The conversation is overheard by Stanley, who is extremely upset by it. Later that evening, he reflects on how his great-grandfather Stanley Yelnat managed to survive in the desert for 16 days after Kate Barlow robbed his wagon. Stanley actually managed to survive thanks to a location known as God's Finger. Since Stanley had become insane by the time he was located, no one is aware of its location. The next day, Stanley makes the decision to flee in order to save his friend Zero. He finally locates Zero sleeping beneath an old abandoned boat after spending hours wandering through the desert. The latter reveals that he was able to survive thanks to the peach-filled jars he discovered in the boat. The boat clearly belonged to the late Sam. The boys then notice a mountain that resembles a human thumb in the distance. Stanley gives it his full attention before suddenly realizing that the mountain is God's finger. The boys begin climbing the mountain in the hopes of discovering something, but about halfway up, Zero becomes exhausted and is unable to go any further. Stanley takes Zero up the mountain on his back and refuses to give up on him. By carrying her great-grandson, this unintentionally fulfills his great-grandfather's promise to Madame Zeroni. They discover the creek once they arrive at the mountain summit. They also find the onion Sam had planted close to the water. Stanley's father finally discovers a peach and onion solution for stinky shoes at home in the meantime. The family's attorney shows up at the camp to pick up Stanley after he is also found to be innocent. The warden doesn't reveal anything about Stanley's escape, though. The next day, Zero is feeling better and admits that it was because of him that Stanley ended up at the camp. The sneakers were actually unintentionally taken from the charity auction by Zero, who then panicked and threw them off a bridge when he saw the police searching for them. Stanley had the misfortune of having the sneakers fall on top of him. The latter is surprised to hear this, but he is not upset. He is thankful that he was able to locate God's thumb, though. Once more, the past is referenced in the film. Sam's boat is finally located by Kate Barlow in the desert-like lake that has dried up. Trout Walker and his wife show up at the scene as the woman is alone and thinking about her deceased lover, due to a severe drought that caused them to lose everything. They demand to know where Kate has hidden all of her stolen treasures. Instead of assisting them, Kate does the unthinkable and allows a yellow-spotted lizard to bite her. Since then, Trout Walker's predecessors have been searching the dried lake for Kate's treasure, including the current warden. Stanley and Zero go back to the prison to search for the treasure chest where he first discovered Kate's lipstick tube. When they finally succeed, the warden and Mr. Sears show up and attempt to seize the trunk. They quickly retreat, though, when they see that the boys have been climbed upon by the yellow-spotted lizards. The warden is still awaiting the lizards' departure the following morning in order to steal the chest. It turns out that the lizards don't like the onions the boys have been eating, which keeps the boys alive. After some time, Stanley's attorney and the police show up as well. When Zero notices the name Stanley Yellen had written on the trunk, the warden's claims that the boys stole her trunk are quickly refuted. Stanley is therefore permitted to leave with the trunk, while the warden and her thieves are taken into custody. For the first time in a century, it also starts to rain in the desert. The boys later travel to Stanley's house where they equally divide the loot. With his newly acquired wealth, Zero hires a private investigator to track down his mother, and it turns out that she had also been looking for him all this time. When the boys move in next door, they extend an invitation to all the campers who have been let go. That's all for today. Subscribe and like it if you want more videos like this.